On May 5th, 1864, the Battle of the Wilderness commences with General Grant and General Meade against Robert E. Lee. Now, in this field, it says, its surrounding woods fell nearly one-third of the men killed or wounded at the Battle of the Wilderness. The 2-mile Gordon Flank attack trail tracks the Battle of the Wilderness in all its horrible forms. The open field Union attacks here that initiated the battle, the stalemate in the tangled woods to the north, and the devastating Confederate flank attack that, after 2 days of fighting, almost brought the Federals to disaster. The Wilderness, hell itself. The mature forests here today bear little resemblance to the wilderness of 1864. For years before the war, the vast tracts of the wilderness had been timbered. When the armies arrived, they found a sometimes impenetrable landscape of matted thickets and young trees. Wrote one of Grant's officers, "It was a battle fought with the ear and not the eye." All circumstances seemed to combine to make the scene of using Jeff Sharaa's Civil War battlefields as my reference for resource. It said Lee's plan was simple: pin Grant down in the wilderness, where the rough terrain would eliminate the numerical advantage that the Union forces enjoyed. With Grant's men virtually blind to what faced them, Lee could launch attacks from 2 or even 3 directions and possibly drive the Federal troops away, just as Stonewall Jackson had done the year before. Obvious danger to Lee was that on May 5th he was attacking the Army of the Potomac with a force a third the size of his enemy. The Federal unit's position along the route of Ewell's attack moved quickly to meet the danger, and a fight soon spread across the open ground into the thickets on either side of the main roadway, which is the Orange Turnpike. Ewell's men began to dig in, throwing up hastily constructed defenses as Federal units of Warren's 5th Corps drove towards them. The fight was vicious and costly, the lines wavering, ground lost and gained. As the day passed, Warren called desperately for reinforcements, and Grant supported him with Sedgwick's 6th Corps, men who were only now arriving on the field. But Sedgwick did not reach the fighting until mid-afternoon, and the battle had already exhausted itself. Though Sedgwick pressed an attack toward Ewell's left flank, the fight grew stagnant in the dense woods, and no progress could be made by either side. Sedgwick realized that nothing could be accomplished, so by nightfall, he had pulled his men back alongside Warren's corps, and the Federal soldiers did as their enemy had already done. They built defensive works. Farther south of the Orange Turnpike, the parallel road, Orange Plank Road, was the scene of another equally vicious confrontation. A.P. Hill's Confederates had moved toward Grant's left, southern flank, hoping to roll up Grant's position there. But Meade had received word of Hill's advance, and Hancock's 2nd Corps was rushed into the position to confront Hill. As had happened on the Orange Turnpike, the two sides collided along the plank road in the blind morass of brush and undergrowth, both sides absorbing huge losses in a fight that was nearly impossible for the commanders to manage. In the dense thickets, the fighting was occasionally hand-to-hand, men suddenly facing their enemies only a few yards apart. Frustrated artillerymen had no real targets and often simply fired their cannon in the brush regardless of whom they might hit. Blasts of canisters killing and mangling men on both sides. As night fell, Lee's position along the Orange Turnpike was as strong as that of the men he faced. But to the south along the plank road, A.P. Hill made a deadly mistake. With hillsmen scattered all through the woods, there was little organization, officers having no idea where their commanders were. Instead of pulling back, reorganizing out of range of the muskets of the federal troops, Hill chose to keep his men where they were. Throughout a dismal, exhausting night, Hill's troops had no food other than what they might by chance be carrying. They had no water beyond the small creeks that wound close by to attempt to find sleep right where they were, since any sound brought musket fire from an enemy or a friend that no one could see. The Battle of the Wilderness happened from May 5th to May 6th, and it would be a costly fight for both sides, ending in a stalemate. But there was one such area that would lead to brutal fighting and chaos and just complete destruction of an army. If I were fighting, I would have to say, if I were fighting, the sights I would say and see would have probably definitely demoralized me. But for many, they used it as fuel to fight the next fight. And that is at the Orange Plank and Brock Road intersection, where the heaviest fighting took place. It is May 1864. General Grant and the Army of the Potomac, along with General Meade, have begun the Overland Campaign. Right now I am at an area known as the woods along the Orange Plank Road. An area that will soon become a grim sight for both sides. Now, during the Battle of the Wilderness, Lee and Meade, they'll fight one another again. But it is a dry day, and with the amount of small arms fire that happens, it ignites the brush underneath. The brush that's underneath in the woods that I'm along here catch fire. And all of the wounded, or at least a lot of the wounded and dying, are left by retreating forces on both sides and left to defend themselves getting out, and a lot will perish in these woods. Now, the wilderness is a bloody campaign, a bloody battle itself, but the horrors that come along these woods will forever be memorized by those who fought here. Now, it says here at this plaque I'm at, to give you a better sense of everything, it said the Battle of the Wilderness climaxed here on the twilight of May 6, 1864. After a day of seesaw fighting in the woods behind you, the Confederates mounted a final effort to take the Plank Road, Brock Road intersection. 100 yards to your left, thousands of Confederate troops tore through these woods, wrapped in the smoke of burning leaves and underbrush. Thousands of Union soldiers awaited them behind earthworks, the remains of which still stand about 40 yards ahead of you. As the Confederates reached this point, piles of brush put here by Union soldiers slowed them. Union musket fire whipped through their ranks. Fire creeping eastward toward the Union works prevented their movement forward. Only in one place, the works opposite to you, did the Confederates break through the Union line, but a Union counterattack quickly sealed the breach. The final Confederate attack ended in bloody repulse. It says, near here, a section of Union log works caught fire, causing the Union troops defending them to fall back. Confederate troops surged through the flames and planted their flag on the abandoned works, but within minutes, Union counterattacks drove them out. An artist made the above sketch of the Union earthworks along the Brock Road on May 7, 1864, one day after Lee's assault. Now, I have with me here Jeff Sharaa's Civil War battlefields and a passage about the wilderness on page 175 I want to read. As the men rode toward the sounds of the fight, they surprised a group of wary Confederates moving through the jumble of brush. The Confederate troops had been surprised too often, and their jumpiness caused them to open fire on the group of horsemen. Micah Jenkins was killed, and Longstreet was severely wounded, shot in the throat. Without the push from their commander, the Confederate assault began to lose steam, and with Hancock's men regaining their composure and their defensive lines, the effects of the masterful flank attack began to fade. Before Lee could put Longstreet's troops back into motion, any chance of continuing their success was gone. Worse for Lee, the Army of Northern Virginia had once again lost its best field commander. And this happens a little after a year from Stonewall Jackson getting shot, so Lee is probably suffering from PTSD from that. At the Orange Turnpike on Lee's left flank, the day had passed mostly without major incident, but late in the day, Ewell authorized Brigadier General John B. Gordon to attack the Union right flank, which Gordon believed was vulnerable. The attack worked as Gordon had planned, driving the startled Federal troops back into the woods. Had there been sufficient daylight, Gordon's attack might have posed a serious threat to that part of Grant's army. But darkness prevailed, and Gordon's attack succeeded only in scattering 2 Federal brigades. As the fire spread once more through the thickets, the 2 armies lay like 2 wounded beasts, each angrily eyeing one another. But throughout the day of May 7th, there was little fighting, neither side having much interest in venturing out beyond its own strong defensive works. Though his army was resting, Grant was already forming a new strategy. Several miles to the south, Federal cavalry under Philip Sheridan had spent May 6th scouting a route that would lead the Federal army away from the wilderness, put them back on a route that would threaten Richmond. A small force of Confederates had blocked Sheridan's way, forcing a brief but bloody engagement. But Grant ordered Sheridan to continue the southward push. Grant wanted the road clear of rebels so that the Army of the Potomac could place itself between Lee and Richmond. A situation Lee would have to respond to. On May 7th, Sheridan's men engaged in several cavalry fights with Lee's horsemen, commanded by Major General Wade Hampton and Lee's son, W.H.F. Rooney Lee. As the fight spread out over the roadways and open pastures, the rebels were driven far enough out of harm's way that Grant could now begin his new campaign. And I'll take him to Spotsylvania Courthouse. These woods here were once on fire. They've regenerated. And now you see snow, as it is mid to late January of 2025. These were Eerie sounds, I'm sure, coming from the men who were wounded. Now, one brigade that stood out at the wilderness is a Vermont regiment that earned themselves a little memorial, the monument that's out here in the wilderness. I'm going to read the plaque like I always do, but I believe, don't hold me to it until I get there, and they were known for closing up that line and doing that counterattack to repulse Lee's army. And thinking about it is crazy. Now, I know it's snowing here, and snow brings quiet. Everybody knows snow brings quiet. I came here before, it was just this quiet without the snow. And it's eerie. It's eerie even now. I never felt this full measure of eeriness as I do now. I'm up on this one plaque, this one sign that's right here. Wipe it. That was covered in snow. That's good to know. So it says here, the wilderness of today looks different than it did in 1864. Then it was a patchwork of second growth forest, brush obscured, briars grabbed, and thickets disrupted battle lines. One soldier described the combat here as bushwhacking on a grand scale. For men accustomed to fighting in open woods and fields, the tangled landscape of the wilderness translated into sheer horror. Smoke from thousands of rifles hovered motionless in the air, choking the combatants. Enemy lines rose up, fired a volley, then disappeared into the haze. Many of the men never even saw their foes. They simply fired at muzzle flashes in the undergrowth. And when the dry leaves caught fire, wounded soldiers burned to death. To a Union officer, it seemed that hell itself had usurped the place of earth. The woods would light up with the flashes of musketry, as if with lightning, while the incessant roar of the volleys sounded like the crashing of thunderbolts. Brave men were falling like autumn leaves, and death was holding high carnival in our ranks. Here's that monument to that Vermont regiment that was here. So we've made it to the Vermont Brigade Memorial Monument. And it says here, in these woods, during the Battle of the Wilderness on May 5th and 6th, 1864, Vermont's Old Brigade suffered 1,234 casualties while defending the Brock Road and Orange Plank Road intersection. The flag of each regiment, though pierced and tattered, still flaunts in the face of the foe, and noble bands of veterans with thinned ranks and but few officers to command still stand by them, and they seem determined to stand so long as there is a man to bear their flag aloft or an enemy in the field. Brigadier General Lewis A. Grant, Brigade Commander. Now, I know I keep talking about these woods. I'm in the woods. But these woods saw a lot of the casualties. These woods bore brunt of those emotions and all those soldiers who fought here. And if you're wondering, by the way, if I'm cold, I'm not. My father-in-law had a running joke that I was from Buffalo because I took frequent trips up there in upstate New York, not Buffalo itself, in a lot of the cold season. This is nothing to me. If you're wondering why I'm doing this all in the snow and it's like minus 30, like below freezing, I would say, and I'm in just plaid and a hat and flannel shoes without socks and jeans, because I thoroughly enjoy the cold. I'm always wishing for cold to come. But these woods hold all of that somber, all the suffering, all of the sadness that came, and the gruesome fighting. So, yeah. It's hard to believe, and that was even 161 years ago, because World War II wasn't that long ago, and wilderness wasn't long ago from World War II. So that's how I look at it. So, yep. Now, one of the things I do have to say is quite ironic is I come to a place that was filled with fire. The fire's hot. I'm visiting when it's snowing, the complete opposite. So I have to say that it's ironic in that sense. So gives time for healing, even though these grounds will never be healed.